This is a photo from 2003 when we couldn't get any support for what was becoming known as synthetic biology. And so we worked with the people who shared a dream that we had of making biology a little bit easier to engineer over and over again. And over the next decade, this is what shows up. And this shows up without a sales and marketing budget or a big center grant or anything like that. It shows up because we were creating on ramps into desire, where people from all over the world, now 50 going on 70,000 alumni through this program, wish to work together in a sharing community to get better at bioengineering. And so I want to reflect a little bit on that experience and bring it to you for consideration. Martin Luther King didn't give a speech on having a plan. Of course, he had a plan, but he gave a speech about a dream. And so I wish to understand what the dream of the PCA is and reflect on that a little bit. So dreams are linked to narrative structure. And we experience many different forms of dream. You can represent them really simply with lines. So Moore's law for computing, more sequencing, genomics, more synthesis, and so on of DNA. Where does that get us? And we make up stories about where it's going to get us. Sometimes we like them, sometimes we don't. It depends who you are. Will humans transcend biology? When we make up these stories, we fail oftentimes to ask questions like, is this a future I want? Is this a future anybody wants? Will this be a fair future? Will I find meaning in this future? Will I be a citizen of this future? And it's problematic when we don't embed these questions in our dreaming, because we know from history what happens when we don't do that. So my favorite example from economics is Keynes in 1930, the Depression, declaring the Depression to be a blip in this essay, and that the economy will start growing again. And within 100 years, there'll be so much compounded economic growth that there'll be plenty of money for everybody. His mistake is that he underestimated the economic growth, apparently. We got even more economic growth. But of course, we know there's not plenty of money for everybody in reality, at least is how we're operating, because certain questions weren't asked or sustained along the way. So dreams are funny. They come in two flavors, fear and love, to simplify it. And if you lead with a dream of fear, it requires the bad thing to at least start to happen before there's action. And I know this will be controversial, but I believe what I'm saying. I think climate change is an example of attempting to lead with a negative framing, a negative dream, where it's inevitable it has to start happening before we get collective action. What would climate awesome look like? Who knows, because that's not the structure of our narrative right now. Positive dreams, on the other side, can enable collective action in advance of reality. And we all know of the Apollo program in the 60s, but what's really interesting is the 13 years or so following World War II to structure the dream in the collective consciousness to get people excited about going to space. So the question I have for the group is what's your dream? And building on Amy's comments, it's really our dream, including the dream of the critics. Where will the plant cell atlas take everybody all together? And I'm putting a post note in here for Borges' poem on exactitude in science as a way of wondering about the utility of an atlas in the extreme, right? Is the atlas the end destination of the dream per se, or I suspect it's more than that. Sue asked me to talk a little bit about politics, if you will, as it relates to science and examples of dreams. So on the top left here is the Endless Frontier Act, introduced by Schumer and Khanna and others on the Republican side, five-fold increase in the National Science Foundation budget in the US, returning to the endless frontier dream of Vannevar Bush. Okay, so maybe that's a dream. It's just the plant cell atlas is part of the frontier of science. Who knows what's beyond the frontier, but we're going to get there. The other approach you see with bio in the US right now is jobs and money. The Bioeconomy Summit, for example, at the White House last fall. It's hard to talk about biology because most people don't understand biology, but a lot of people understand jobs and money, and that's a proxy for what people might care about. These aren't really sufficient in my mind. And so on the right, I have how within synthetic biology and beyond, we're struggling to articulate a collective dream that goes well beyond the nerdy science and engineering. So how about we get 10 billion people on this planet flourishing in partnership with the rest of life on Earth? Earth Trek, not Star Trek. How about we take infectious disease off the table? How about we have a culture of citizenship? And of course, when we tinker and build things, we'll understand things better. When I think about plants, I wanted to share one vignette experience I had up in Toronto at the Quaker House, where the World Council of Churches brought religious leaders together to talk about synthetic biology and food, agriculture. And I met a gentleman, a Mexican vanilla farmer, who taught me I knew nothing about Mexican vanilla farming. But from that interaction, I learned about the culture of practice of vanilla farming, the stories and so on. And I talked about this with Donna Haraway, the anthropologist in Santa Cruz. And one of the things that comes out of this is an understanding of plants might allow for an enrichment of practice, not to make molecules, not to make food, but basically to make meaning, so that you could construct ways of interacting with plants that humans would find meaningful. I don't have enough time to lift the lid on that, but just as a placeholder. So I think there's a type of dream showing up which is not rocketing away into who knows where, but transitioning from one past to a new future, where the new future is just basically awesome. We can provision, and we have a society grounded in citizenship and democracy, and we can do it now because we have the capacities to deploy at scale to pull this off, including with plants. So I'll pause there and hope that was useful.